everyone. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our blog and our YouTube channel and our newsletter and our great sponsors, Your Dolce Vita, Italy Rooting, and Abiativo Casa. And today I'm here with Maggie Workman. So welcome, Maggie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So where's your family from in Italy, and when did they arrive in the States?
My father's family is from Onano in Viterbo, Italy. He came to the US in 1913. My grandmother was born in the US, but her family is also from Italy. They're from the sort of east coast of Italy. So they didn't know each other in Italy at all.
Yeah, well, that's like my parents too. They wound up in Corona, Queens, uh, and my mom's family came from same thing. They came from the East Coast, and my father's family was from Naples. Um, and they settled in the Chicago area.
No, so my grandfather came in 1913, and then he spent some time in New York with his brother-in-law and sister who had come over apparently previously and worked in, from what I'm told, like the salt mines or something there. And then they moved to Ohio, so Canton, Ohio, and that's where my grandparents met. So I'm originally from Ohio. I just moved to Chicago for a job after I graduated from school. So yeah, all of the family is basically in Ohio.
And and that's one of the things that I didn't realize until I started doing this, that Ohio, there were a lot of Italians in Ohio, and I never realized that. Coming from New York, we think all the Italians are from New York. So,
Well, there was a metal factory, and then the Akron rubber factory. I think a lot of people came to work there. There was a very big community where my grandmother lived and my grandfather lived. They were all in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was all basically, I think, from the same region. So they would bring people over, so
and that happened a lot, as we know. Um, so now, how far back has your research been able? Have you been able to go with your research?
on my grandfather's side, I've gone back to like my great great grandfather. And I have a little bit more on my grandmother's side, but I linked into a tree on Ancestry, so some of it I need to verify, So I'm farther back on my grandmother's side, maybe like great 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 great. Um, so let's see, my father's third great grandparents, on my fourth great grandparents on my grandmother's side.
Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And yeah, I think that's one important thing on Ancestry, is to try and verify it the best you can, because the names, and people think that somebody was somebody, and maybe they weren't. They may have been a cousin, or they may have been just somebody else in the town. So it is very important to try and verify it whenever you can.
Yeah, going through some of this ancestry, there was always sort of some family, I don't want to say folklore or whatever, but going through, you're like, I don't see where this is coming in. So it's really interesting to see some of the actual research and comparing it to what was sort of passed down, by word of mouth.
And I was lucky on my mom's side, because and I don't know why. I think it may have been one of the places that um, Family Search first started indexing or filming the records, because her hometown, and it's a small town in Bari, Torito, but all the records, all of the records from 1809 are there. I found everybody like really pretty easy, a lot easier than I thought. And my dad's family from Naples was very, very hard because there's, millions and millions and millions of records in Naples. So sometimes you just have to get lucky to find the records.
Right. I found my grandfather's birth certificate because we didn't have a copy of it. And um, so I went on Family Search, and the church records were there digitized. And so I searched through some of the records. The problem is basically they took a picture of each of the pages and dropped it like in a folder or something. So you basically have to open up each page and look at it, and then close the page, open up the next page. It's not super easy, but luckily my grandfather was born in March. So I only had to go through like 3 months of pictures to find his. So I was able to find it. And then that's how we found his parents. We didn't really know his parents' name. My grandfather only spoke Italian, and my father did not speak Italian, so they couldn't communicate very well. Um, we didn't really know a lot of history, so that really gave us his parents' names, and then I was able to go from there to do some more research.
So now that's really interesting. So your grandfather spoke Italian, but your father didn't speak a lot or speak the
He spoke
dialect of.
none, except he could maybe swear, I think, in
Yeah, well,
Italian or
like, yeah,
something.
me
Yeah.
too.
Well, but when my grandparents, came, uh, they weren't wanted to be Americans. And so they made sure my father spoke English. And he has 5 sisters, so none of them, I think, speak Italian. My grandmother did, so she obviously was able to communicate with her husband, but yeah, they weren't able to communicate very easily.
Wow, that's interesting. My parents, they did speak. I don't think they were like fluent, but um, my father's father, I didn't know at all. He passed away when I was a
Mm.
baby, but my grandmother always spoke to my father in Italian. And my mother's parents, they spoke broken English, but they would, my aunts and uncles with them would drift in and out of Italian, or they'd be, you know, half the sentence would be in Italian, the other half would be in English. It was very strict. Or actually, I keep saying Italian, and it really wasn't Italian because it was a dialect from that region. But it was very interesting those conversations, because you understood some of it, and the rest of it you had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah, no. I like I said, in their neighborhood when they were growing up, there was a lot of Italian people. So I think that like my grandparents and the neighbors would speak Italian, but the kids did not.
Yeah. So what did your grandparents do? What in America? What kind of occupations did they have?
So my grandfather worked at like a metal factory. So he was a blue collar worker. My grandmother, she basically was a homemaker, but she did have some small jobs like cleaning jobs or that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and I suppose that's typical. In New York, there were a lot of factories in New York, and they're all gone now, which is a sad thing. I mean, I remember growing up where they were still making dresses and suits and everything in New York City, which I don't think people born 30 years ago actually even realized that there was so much industry in New York City itself. Um, so now you've been back, right? You've gone back to the
So
hometown?
yes, my daughter got married last September, and they wanted to get married in Italy.
Oh,
She
wow. That's
married
great.
a boy who was Italian, not from, they were from Sicily. I mean, he was American, and his parents, I think, were well, his mom might not have been born in the US, but has been in the US for most of her life, I think. But they wanted to get married in Italy, so we went to it was near Rome. We all stayed in a villa, and they got married in a small church in the region, and it was about an hour and a half away from my grandfather's village. So no one had really ever been there. So I made sure that while we were there to visit the village. Um, so, I went there. I had from my grandfather's birth certificate, the house number that they lived at when he was born. So I'm assuming that's where he lived when he was little. At least that was listed on his birth certificate. So I wanted to go find that. And then I was going to try to get some copies of some birth certificates of my great grandparents. Unfortunately, the day we went, I think it was like a Thursday or something, and they were closed on Thursdays. So I wasn't able to do that. But I walked around um, the village, found his home. And then there was another address listed on my great grandmother's death certificate because I found that. So I went to that location to see that house. So it was really interesting to see it. It was basically exactly like I had in my head um, to see it. Um, I did talk with some people there, and I went to a shop uh, and to get some souvenirs. It's hard to get souvenirs in a little village like that. They don't have souvenir shops or anything. But they had these magnets that said Onano in the window. So I went in to get these. And then I wanted to bring my dad back a newspaper, a local newspaper, and just find some trinkets like to bring back home. And so I ended up buying some really random things. I bought a newspaper. I bought my mom a little magazine cookbook um, because I thought she'd like that. And I brought my nephews some Pokemon cards that were in Italian. And then I bought the magnets. I just bought some random stuff. And I told the lady, I tried to explain myself because I felt a little silly for buying all of this stuff, and I said, "Well, my grandfather was from this village, um, so I want to bring back things from home." And she was so welcoming, and we got into a wonderful discussion about it. And so I really got involved a little bit in the village. They're doing a project on reaching out to family members who have of people from the village who have moved to like America and their families. So they're sort of reaching out to those families. And so I got involved sort of in that community. So they couldn't have been more welcoming. And it's just from randomly telling this lady why I was purchasing all of this random stuff. I got really involved in this community. I've met some other people from the village who are working on their ancestry. So it's been a really amazing journey.
Now, did she speak English?
She did not speak English, so we spoke through Google Translate on our phones, and then she showed me a picture of a flyer, which I have now found out they do weekly or monthly um, interviews of these family members from people who have left the village to go to America or other places. And so she showed me this flyer, and I there was a Facebook logo. And so I looked up that Facebook logo and I liked the page. And then so then we got in the communication on Messenger. And so then I went back. I went back to the villa for the wedding, and she messaged me through uh, Facebook Messenger that the mayor wanted me to come back to meet him and to get a tour. So then I went back the next day and I met the mayor. They gave me a tour of the village hall, and then I met a guy who was writing a book about the um, people from the village who have went abroad. And so he wanted me to sort of update my family's part in the book. And so I mean, he's the one who told me about my grandfather working in the salt mines in New York. We didn't know that. And then he also sent me a census page that said that he worked in the rubber factory. in Akron, which is nearby, which nobody knew that he ever worked there. We always thought he just worked at this metal factory. But in and on the census, he had written down, he was a rubber factory worker. So it's really gotten me some good information for my search, my ancestry search.
Wow, that's fantastic. Did you find out if there's was any family still there, or
They
they were
said
all gone?
that there is one family member with that name who lives there, but they either like summer there. They weren't there at the time, so they'd only come back periodically. But there is still somebody from the family who lives there, and I've been trying to figure out how he's connected because my grandfather only had a sister, so obviously she doesn't have that name. And then, so I can't figure out on his brother or like his father's brothers who he's connected to because I haven't reached that part of the tree yet.
And that's something that they called you back. I never heard that before. I mean, a lot of people obviously have gone. I've gone but I've never heard somebody going and then having the mayor call back and say, "We want to see you again."
Yeah, and I think it's because they're doing this big project where they're trying to reach out to family members to do an interview. So I ended up doing an interview with them. Um, So and to talk with the guy who's doing the book, so I think that's why. Um, but like I said, they've been very, very generous. Um, it was a little bit difficult because for one, I didn't have a car, and these villages, they're up in the hills, um, and so it wasn't easy to get there. You can't get there by public transportation very easily. The first day I went, my daughter, not the daughter who was getting married, but her sister, um, her friend had a car. They were there for the wedding. They had a car. They offered to take me that first day, because they were the only ones who had a car. So they generously drove me there an hour and a half, on these hilly roads. And then the next day, because that was their last day. They spent their last day in Italy driving me to my village. So I was really appreciative of that. And then the next day, my daughter who was getting married, they had rented a car. They couldn't take me the day before because everybody in the wedding party was going to this winery. Um, but then that day they were free, so they drove me back. So because she wanted to see the village and meet the mayor and everything. So yeah, I was surprised. And like I said, we were just communicating through Messenger after I followed their Facebook post about this project that they were working on. So I was surprised to go back or to be invited back.
Yeah, and if they're interested, if you're in contact with them, I'd love to have them on, the guy who's writing the book and the mayor, and if they're interested in doing it, I'd love to do it because um a lot of these little towns now, we just did it with Penne, and I'm trying to do it in Vickery, to get the mayors on to talk about what they're doing and their projects, because a lot of the mayors there now, especially in these small towns that are, losing population, are trying to do these kind of progressive type things to bring, whether it's Americans back or Italians back or whatever. So, um, yeah, I'd be interested if they're interested to have them on and interview them.
Yeah, they
Um,
just had a festival May 11th through 12th that they wanted me to come back to the festival.
I
Um,
know they think we just,
I know.
we have
I'm
all
like
this,
I
we could
said,
just
I'm a
hop on a phone.
teacher and it's in the middle of the school year. It's not that easy for me to get out. Plus it was Mother's Day weekend here, so but
They're always telling me, everybody's always telling me, "Hey, you have to come back again." I'm like, well, it's not that simple. It's not
no,
that easy.
especially to get to these little villages. I mean, you have to drive, and I don't know that I feel comfortable driving on those hills. Um,
No.
I didn't even like being a passenger, so I can't imagine driving.
I drove there. It's almost 30 years ago. I drove from Naples to Sorrento, and we drove around, and I had a car, but I wouldn't do it now. if you're on the big highways, it's not so bad, but getting in and out of these towns or driving through Naples that's insanity. Um, but I'm interested. So why did your daughter decide, or her and her husband, why did they decide they wanted to get married in Italy?
I don't know. My daughter does. She likes to do that kind of stuff. I don't want to say she's extra because if she is listens to this, but I think it was important to them. They went there on vacation. They really loved it. Um, and they wanted a destination wedding. I think they wanted a small intimate thing, and so that it just all kind of worked out. And they worked with a wedding planner who kind of specializes in these sort of destination weddings in Italy.
Um, yeah, I would love for my daughter, you know, when they decide to get married to get married in Italy. I
Yeah,
would
I
think
mean,
it's
logistically, it's a
fabulous.
little bit difficult because you to get married legally there, you have to sort of go early and get the license, do all of that. But you can get married here, at the courthouse or whatever, and then have your sort of wedding there.
Yeah, well, I'm working on getting citizenship
Mm.
for myself and the kids. I'm working through a lawyer. So if you petition the court, rather than just go through the consulate, and he could do um anyone else within the same um chain, if you will, for lack of a better word. Um, so you could do, father, children, grandchildren all at once if you want to do something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I'm working on getting my citizenship because my daughter obviously wants her citizenship. So that's really why I've gotten into a lot of this ancestry is trying to find some of this information. So that's why when I went to Onano to try and get the birth certificates of my great grandparents, um, well, that's why I wanted to do it. Unfortunately, they weren't able to give it to me because they were born before. Apparently before the records were um, nationalized or so they didn't have the records. They did have their death certificates. I was able to get that. I wasn't able to get their birth certificates because um, they were born in let me see 1862 and 1864, and I think they said something like 1865 is maybe the year when you can get the sort of national.
yeah, it depends on the region. The South goes back to 1809, but once you start getting up towards Rome, a lot of those places didn't start until the 1830s. Some, like you said, even in the
Mm.
1850s or 1860s.
Yeah, they
Um,
told me 65 because
yeah,
my great grandfather was 1864, so he was um pretty close, but no. So I think I need to go back to the church records now to get them, but those records are not digitized. I was
but
able to get my
you shouldn't
grandfather's.
need your uh what year was your father born?
My father was born in 1931.
And so his grandfather, that you shouldn't need anything further back than his grandfather.
Well, yes, but I need their birth certificate, which I can't get. Well, the list that they gave me of what I needed, I mean, it was a pretty big list.
I know it's a lot. I
Yeah, so that's
understand.
why I'm not sure that I'm able to do it. I've run into some snags, but interestingly, I ran into snags on um my grandmother's side who was born in the US. So that seems to be, but it says my paternal grandfather birth certificate, my paternal grandmother birth certificate, my grandparents marriage certificate, um paternal grandfather and or grandmother's death certificate, father and mother's birth and marriage certificate, father and mother's death certificate. Huh. Grandparents marriage. Someplace it said the great his grandparents, my father's grandparents, birth certificate.
Yeah, that's interesting because they didn't ask me for that. I only had to go back as far as
Well, this is
my
this is like a
grandparents.
form that I
I
found
know, yeah.
on like one of the, like you said, like these lawyers groups who tried, to help you.
And they may do that because in some cases maybe they want it. Um, because I was working with one person who got the things, and I was originally going to go through Naples, but they said there's just so many there, and it's harder. So then I just because I could go through my mother or my father, because I was born after 1948. So when I talked to the lawyer, and he said it's going to be a lot easier and a lot quicker if you go through uh, uh, Puglia rather than Campania because of there's just less people there, and they said we could deal with the judges easier. Um, and so my snag in here right now, the only snag I have at the moment, and I'm sure it'll get fixed out, is that my mother, her name on her birth certificate is Rachel Caroline, because she was named after my grandfather's sister. But my grandmother they apparently had an argument either just before or right after my mother was born. So they started calling my mother Caroline. So all her paperwork,
Mm.
all her license and everything, death certificate, marriage certificate, all says Caroline. Uh, but her birth certificate says Rachel. So they said, well, I had to send for her social security application because they said that should show, you know, the Rachel Caroline thing or something like that. Um, they kind of said it's probably not absolutely positively necessary to have, but better to have it than not have it. That's
Yeah.
kind of the way they explained it to
I
me.
I ran into the same issue with my grandmother. Well, I tried to get their marriage certificate, and I wrote to Ohio to get it, and they called me and they're like, "We can't give this to you because," I had written to ask for, her name is Mary, which that's what she went by, Mary Tonielli's marriage certificate, and she said they said it says Maria in one place, it says Marie in another, and then Mary, she signed it Mary. So on on the wedding certificate, it's spelled three different ways. And so she wouldn't give it to me. Um, she said I needed to go to court to get it changed or something. So I went back to Ohio for the solar eclipse. It was going through my hometown. And so I went there in person. I thought, oh, if I go in person, maybe they won't give me this runaround. And they did give me the runaround, but I ended up coming home with the with the marriage certificate. Um, so I'm hoping that that's okay because she did sign it, Mary Tonielli. Um, I don't know that it matters so much. The problem is she does not have a birth certificate.
Oh, really?
They
Wow.
never made a birth certificate for her, and she was one of like 13 kids or something, and from what they could find, there was only maybe four of the kids had birth certificates, and those were mainly created later in life when they were trying to, like, they went to
Hmm.
court, I think, to get those done for whatever reason. So I'm having the same issue that you are. I did write through the Freedom of Information Act to get my grandmother's social security application. So I did get that. And then I also wrote to get her passport because she did have a passport. She went back to Italy in like the 40s, I think, or maybe the 40s or the 50s. She went to Italy. So she had to have a passport, but I don't know how she got a passport without having a birth certificate. So there had to be a way. I know she got her social security, I think, because her social security check, when it was time for her to get her check, she brought a person who could swear that they were there. I don't know when she was born or that they knew her, whatever. Um, so she brought um, a person to vouch for to vouch for
Hmm.
her. So that's the last thing I need is to work on my grandmother's situation because she doesn't have a birth certificate. And she was born in the US. So I didn't really think that that would be my stumbling block in getting citizenship, would be my grandmother's side. But it has been an issue. So like you, I'm hoping the Social Security application and then this copy of the passport application might be sufficient.
Yeah, enough to do it. How long did it take for the Social Security application to come back?
Maybe 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay, I think I'm at about 4 right now, so should be
Yeah.
coming soon then.
No, I afterwards I did the passport application because, well, originally when I was looking for the birth certificate, they told me that they could have a birth certificate made, but I needed these two pieces of evidence. Um, so the passport um, was one of them, the passport application. But I've come to find out now that since she's deceased, that they won't make the birth certificate. So anyway, but I had already sent away for the passport, but then they just sent it back and said I had to send them a um uh not certified, when you go to a person and they um
Oh, like the apostille thing?
the registrar, yeah, like the
Yeah,
registrar where they
yeah,
I have to go and do my information because they won't give me her passport info
without that, yeah.
without that. So I'm
Well,
still waiting for that.
I had an interesting thing on my father's because um
Mm.
his birthday was April 7th, and I get the birth certificate, and it had um July something, July 18th or something like that. So I was like, how is this possible? You know, it's April 7th. Um, and so I said, my sister had his passport. And I said, what does the passport say? She said, it says July. I said, well, how could that be? So when we finally got the his birth certificate or another transcript of birth certificate or whatever I got, I don't remember exactly what it was. What happened was he was born on April 7th, but he was born in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, which was probably, a very rural area. Maybe there was a birth there, who knows, every 3 months or something like that. Uh, when the clerk who filled out the paperwork to send to the state, he wrote down the date that he submitted the paperwork as my father's birthday.
Yeah.
But I said, my father's not around to ask anymore. I said, why did he do this? And then knowing my father, he probably figured, it's the passport. Who cares what birthday it says on there?
Right,
We're
exactly.
just going away, so it doesn't matter.
Well, on when I was searching the birth certificate of my grandfather on the records from the Onano church, it was recorded in the church book March 2nd. But then when I was in Onano and requested the records and they gave me the official version, it said March 5th. And I asked them about it and they said it's because of that, because of the delay and when they sent it. But they said obviously the church records is when he actually was born, but the official day is March 5th. And I think they celebrated it on March 2nd. Although I'm not 100% sure. But I think that's when they celebrated.
Well, I have cousins that were born in Italy from my oldest uncle. Uh, they left him behind when he was a baby, and they didn't come until later. And my cousin said, they would send, one of the kids, 10 years old, 12 years old, to go to the comune to say, my mother had a baby girl or baby boy. And, so after they said, you have to be careful with some of this stuff. The names are wrong, the dates are wrong, and all of that kind of stuff. But
Yeah,
um,
it's so
uh,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and my last interview just the other day was with somebody. She's gone through the Antonati and found all of these crazy anomalies about how they would do things, how they would correct things. Um, if they got the name wrong, they wouldn't necessarily cross it out. They would put another notation, and you really would have to know what they were trying to say in this. The good thing is though is, they always put the um the grandparents in most of the records. So that makes it easier. And uh sometimes you could find other family members through the witnesses, because a lot of times one of the witnesses might be, a cousin or uncle, or somebody else in the town that would be important. Um and so yeah, so I'm doing it. I'm 73 now. I'm doing it mostly for the kids because I want them to have it. Um, because you don't know if they may want to retire there one day, or travel there,
Yeah.
or spend an extended amount of time there. It's just, I think it's a good thing to have. If you can get it, it's a great thing to have.
Right, exactly. And I'm lucky. I know my my grandparents had um 5 daughters after my father, or including my father. The youngest one, my grandfather became a citizen um before she was born. So I think that that's part of the family won't be able to get the citizenship through him.
Mhm.
But the others could, because he did get U.S. citizenship, but the kids were all born before he got the citizenship. But like you were saying before, when I went to try and get my grandparents' marriage certificate, they couldn't find it for the longest time, and they actually sent me to the library, to the genealogy people, to see if they could find it. Um, but it was their last name was spelled incorrectly, and we ended up finding it, but the person who was writing it down, you could tell, spelled it phonetically, how the people were speaking with an Italian accent. That's how it was spelled um on the marriage certificate. So you could totally see them standing there saying their name, and this person writing it down based on what they were saying, because I really don't think that they could read or write English very well at that time. So somebody, you could tell somebody was writing it down for them. So, but that's why they couldn't find it. So the last name spelled wrong, the first name spelled wrong. My grandmother has 3 spellings of her name, so it's really a messed messed up certificate.
Yeah, and that can make it confusing. Well, the women don't change their names in Italy, right? They still don't. And somebody came to the door of my grandmother's house, and she spoke English. I don't know how well then. This was probably in the 40s, because my uncle was still there. And I don't know if it was a census taker or something like that. And um, she had the same last name as my grandfather. They were both Nicoletti, and but they weren't related. And um, as far as we know, anyway. And so the guy kept asking my grandmother, "What's your maiden name?" And she kept saying Nicoletti. And he said, "No, that's your husband. What was the name before your marriage?" She kept saying Nicoletti. And my uncle was in the other room and finally said, "She knows what you're saying. She has the same last name."
So she didn't have to change her name, although
No, she did.
they didn't. But I mean, yeah.
Well, they did here, because my
No, they
grandmother,
didn't.
my father's mother, she wanted the Sorrentino. So, I guess as they, like on their alien registration, all of that, her name is Sorrentino. It's not Piramalo. But that's the one thing that makes it easy about when you research in Italy. The fact that the women don't change their last names, you can follow the family a lot better than you can here, because they change it, and then you have to go hunting for the maiden name and all of that kind of stuff. Um,
Right, yeah. It's
um,
difficult.
yeah, yeah. So, and in her family, um, I kept, because she came from a famous family and it was well documented. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't find her in the line. And then I realized that she was a woman, so she wouldn't be in uh her mother's line, because I found that she would have been in her father's line. Um, but they had changed the name. So it was really making me nutsy did I have the right family? And then finally I realized it was, and then that was confirmed when I found cousins in Italy and they said, yeah, yeah, we know what the problem was because a few generations ago they added several other names and they just got confusing. So one part of the family has three last names and then the other part still had only the one name. It's like, but boy, for a couple of years it was making me really, really crazy on trying to figure it out. Um,
Yeah.
but
One of the
but
things that when I was doing the genealogy, on Ancestry, I found a tree called Onano village tree or something like that. So somebody had done like a whole tree of everybody in the village. And so once I was able to connect into the tree, that's how I got, more of the background. Although my grandfather wasn't on the tree, but that's because I think he had come to the US after they they kind of stopped like before, because somebody was doing it for their ancestry, and so they got involved in doing the whole village, and so they didn't go down that line because he was in America, but his sister was listed there, so that's how I found it, and then got in contact with them. Uh, so
no,
once you
that's
make these
great.
connections, it's really interesting, but those are the ones that I have to kind of verify to make sure because I don't have the the records. I need to go back and look at some of these, um, either marriage certificates or birth certificates to verify.
Well, yeah, and that's what happened with us in Torito. I have a friend there now in the comune, and he's like, whatever you need, whatever, like, you just ask, and we'll send it, and we'll take care of it. And they're really, you know, fantastic. I know a lot of people complain, well, I sent it, I sent an email or I sent a letter, and they don't respond, and they don't. But if you're able to get there or know somebody or make that connection, they bend over backwards for you for the most part, you know.
Yeah, I told them that I was going to try and come to the festival next year in May. Um, so if I do go, I'm going to spend some time in the church records, if I can, to just do some of this searching, for myself, since most of it isn't digitized, at least back to where I want to go.
So
But
how
they're
did
all
you
there. I mean, they were all born, lived their whole lives in the village. Didn't go anywhere. I mean, so far I have not found anybody who has left the village. Um, Besides my grandfather, like that level, everybody prior to that, they were born and
yeah,
died.
yeah. So how did you feel emotionally when you got there?
Um, I really couldn't believe that I was there. I actually still feel like I can't believe I was there because it's something we've talked about our whole life, about my grandfather coming from Italy, and but no one had really been there, to see it, to see what it looked like. We didn't know, and like I said, we really had no contact with people back home because my my grandfather didn't, like I said, he didn't speak English, so we couldn't really. Well, he died before I was born, but the kids really couldn't ask very many questions. It's only kind of hearsay stuff that they remember, talking about. Um, but So we didn't really know anything about it, except it was a small village, kind of, it was up in the hills, that sort of thing. But going there was so amazing, and I learned a lot. Like they're known for their lentils. Like I had no idea. We had never heard that before. That the region is known for their lentils, because I when I went there, there's this big lentil pot or whatever, and they had like a sign, so I used my Google Translate sign, and you could kind of figure out what it mostly said. It was about how they're famous for their lentils, and this was a lentil pot or whatever. And I'm like, we had never heard anything about that. And when my grandfather came in Ellis Island, or whatever, he wrote down farmer. So I'm wondering if he worked in the lentil fields or if they had a lentil farm. I don't know. But that's something I'm going to, look into because he did put farmer down, which we never knew that. But he was 18 when he came, so he could have just been a farm worker, you know. But we had very little information except the city name. That's all really we knew was the city name. So it was so amazing to be there. And it almost didn't happen. Like I said, I had a hard time getting there. I had to really almost beg a ride for somebody to take me there. So I would have been sad being so close and an hour and a half away and not visiting. So I plan to go back 100%. Hopefully next year, to go back and do some more research. And like I said, everybody was so nice. Um, to go back to see some of the people, and hopefully maybe I'll see some family members if I go back at a time when they're in town, because nobody was there.
Yeah, and it makes me nuts when people tell me they're going to Italy and I say you're going to the hometown and they say no, and I was like, how could you go to Italy and not go to the hometown? But um
Yeah, and we
because it's
had the
different.
plan to do that. My We didn't realize, like, we had never been there, so we really didn't realize. It looks like it's a really short distance or whatever, but when you're there, you realize that it's not a short distance
uh,
because it's like you're going up and down these hills, and the driving we didn't realize driving would be that big of a deal. So my daughter, not the one who was getting married, but my other daughter and her husband were going to rent a car, and so we were going to go in the car that they rented on Thursday. We were going to go, but they ended up not renting a car, um, because they didn't have an international driver's license, which they didn't really know about getting, um, and getting fined if you didn't have a driver's license. So they were afraid to kind of get a car. So I was really disappointed. I'm like, oh no, if you don't get a car, how are we going to get there? Um, so I would have been devastated if I didn't make it there. And I'm so glad I did because it's turned into this interview, right? Just by going there and meeting the people that I did. It's really opened up so much about my family history. I mean, I've looked at houses there. I mean, not that I'm going to buy a house, but I mean, I have sat down and looked to see what's available there. Um,
we do
so
the same thing. Yeah, we
yeah,
do the same thing. um and yeah, it's uh, I'm a firm believer in nothing happens by accident. There, there was a reason their last day that they were nice enough to take you there. And
yeah, yeah. Well, and like I said, when we when we arrived in the village, it was like kind of, I think it might have been market day. I don't know because they had some what I would call like kind of like food truck things, but they weren't food. It was like clothes or household things or whatever were set up in like a little square, which is where there were some parking spaces. And when we pulled up, we parked and we got out. Everybody in the square turned to look at us. Like, who are these strangers in town? We felt a little intimidated, like everybody was staring at us. And we were walking through. I mean, there's really like three streets, or you know what I mean? Like there's no, it's not a big village at all. And so everybody was staring at us as we were walking around. And I was a little bit intimidated. Um, and but when I got into that shop, I really felt compelled to tell this lady about my grandfather living there. And she's the one who's working on this project, doing these interviews with the families of people who have gone abroad. So something was telling me to speak with this lady. I didn't speak with anybody else because everybody was staring at us and making us feel, like we were invading. But I felt compelled to tell her, right? So something led me to talk with her.
yeah,
I have
yeah.
no other explanation because I didn't talk with anybody else there.
Well, and that's why I say it's there's something out there, and that's it just falls together. It's you can't explain it. You really
Yeah,
can't
I
explain it.
can't explain it. Why I felt compelled to talk with her and tell her about my grandfather.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, Maggie, I really appreciate it. You taking the time, and like I said, if anybody in the town, the mayor or the person writing the book or whatever, if they're interested in doing something like this, I'm happy to do it. I could always get a translator, if they don't speak English, or if they don't have somebody there to speak English.
Okay,
But
yeah,
but
I'll
but
let them know.
I like to get the word out there about these villages because it's important for people to know. You know.
It is. It really is.